Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, Maria Garcia Santiana Linares. Maria, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Maria, I want to talk with you today about a story you wrote at the end of 2024, which could serve as a cautionary tale as we all return back to work in 2025. You highlighted some of the career crashes of the past 12 months. So first, to kick off the conversation, any trends that you saw?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think when we look at, this is, I think, our 12th or 13th year of doing this career crash story at the end of the year. And it's really interesting to look at the reasons as to why careers have crashed. Sometimes it's pure luck. Other times, it's bad judgment calls from leadership perspective. So we've seen, a few names on the list this year just have, plummeting stock prices due to bad sales, bad, investment decisions over the past year. We also have seen, a couple of careers crash due to sexual abuse and misconduct allegations. I think that's something, a new trend that we've seen again this year, kind of post the 2018 or 2017, 18, and 19, like Me Too movement. We've seen some of that also resurface. And then, I think something that always tumbles a career or ends a career is a criminal crash, right? A criminal charge, indictments. And so those are kind of the three big themes that we're looking at.
Politics arguably dominated the headlines in all of 2024, and the country really witnessed Biden's career crash when he was on the national stage in a debate against Donald Trump at the end of June of 2024. So can you talk to us about Biden's career trajectory in 2024?
Yeah, so I think 2024 was a year where, decision wise, the year wasn't that bad. The economic track record was pretty stellar. The stock market performed really well. But really, I think what we're focusing on is, the personal career and the number of allegations and just what we saw in the public of his mental decline. I think it sparked a larger conversation, not just in politics, but overall over age, right? And should company boards have age limits? Should jobs have age limits, right? Is there a point in time where there should be a stricter enforcement as to, when just age, we all, our mental decline is there. But I think, if you're at the top seat of the United States government, that the pressure is definitely you have the eye on you.
If you wrote this list in November, if that's when the cutoff was, this person probably wouldn't make the list. But their November, December wasn't too great. And that person I'm talking about is former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. In November of 2024, he was reelected. Trump also nominated him to be his AG. And obviously, if you turn into the news, that came crashing down. So can you talk to us a little bit about Matt Gaetz's late in 2024 career tumble?
Yeah, I think we really saw kind of a peak and fall in the last 2 months of the year. As you mentioned, right? He seemed to be riding the wave. He was poised to be the top law enforcement officer in the country. He was reelected. He had the support, but this ongoing House ethic investigations over, illegal drug use and, again, sexual misconduct with underage women or girls really kind of brought him down. He ended up pulling back out or kind of removing himself from the nomination right a week after Trump nominated him. And then, I believe the House Ethics Committee even, put it out. And in order for him to be nominated, he'd resigned from his seat. So he was already kind of on thin ice in terms of just, standing. It's not all bad. He still has a TV show with OAN, One America News Network. And so, again, I think, if you look at our careers comeback list, that's a list just because you crash one year doesn't mean you can't come back. But really, the last 2 months of 2024 is where we saw Matt Gaetz's career kind of just plummet down.
Entertainment also saw a few names take a tumble fall in 2024. Talk to us about them. I'm looking at P.Diddy and Dan Schneider.
Yeah, so we really saw P.Diddy and Dan Schneider kind of be hit by similar, but I would still say different sort of allegations. P.Diddy is currently sitting in jail. He spent Christmas in jail. His, allegedly or the United States government has charged him with multiple charges of sex trafficking, racketeering. I think over 17 women have come forward and said that, he sexually abused them when they were girls and young kids. So he's really kind of sitting in jail and lost a lot of money, a lot of reputational power. He career crashed this year. I believe the allegations started in December of last year is when we saw the first one, but really this year is like the bulk of everything. And so, his trial date is set to May, and so that's where he'll kind of be in a Brooklyn federal jail. And then on the other side of that, we also have Dan Schneider, popular TV producer for shows in Nickelodeon. I grew up with them, so think Zoe 101, iCarly. He was really kind of at the center of this documentary that was shown on Max called Quiet on Set, about just the kind of toxic work culture that he perpetuated. Now he is kind of countering back, and when the documentary came out, he apologized, but his argument, and is now suing the producers of the documentary over defamation, because it said, in his perspective, right, the documentary kind of implies that he was behind the sexual misconduct and allegations that the documentary kind of details. He's saying, was I running a bad work and a place environment? Yes, but I didn't conduct, and I didn't sexually abuse anyone. And so I think that we'll see. He's kind of a little bit quiet. His last project is set to be released in January 17th of this year. He hasn't really announced anything. That's a Henry Danger movie. Henry Danger was another popular TV series he produced kind of more recently. And so we'll see. I think, definitely tumbled and kind of, we don't know what's next for Dan Schneider's career, and when we'll see a movie or show that he's produced. But I think it's a little bit less extreme than P.Diddy, for sure.
Someone that you featured on the list of 2024 career crashes was ranked 6th on Forbes 2023 list of most powerful women. So talk to us about Karen Lynch and what happened between 2023 and 2024 for this plummet.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see where people start. Karen Lynch is also one of the only 2 women who are on our list this year, which is interesting. She was the former CEO of CVS. You'll see kind of a pattern here of a lot of people who were Fortune 500 CEOs were brought in to change. So they were brought in with the idea of the company is not doing well. It's your job to kind of revitalize it, and they're out this year because they didn't achieve that, even if they did for a little bit. And so Lynch is kind of a story that tells for her time at CVS. She oversaw the company after the CVS pharmacy drugstore retailer acquired Aetna as part of his insurance brand, and it's turning out to be maybe not so, at this point in time, not so good of a bet. Sales have been declining, refunds have been going up reimbursements have been going up on the healthcare side of the business, and so overall the stock is not doing well. It's stock hit a 10-year low during her tenure this past year, and that's usually a sign that not only has your board kind of lost confidence in you, but now Wall Street has. And so if you don't have the backing of either of those, it's kind of really hard for you to stay in power much longer. So yeah, she stepped down in October. She's been replaced by another man. I think, we talked a little bit about this in the comebacks list. But overall, we've seen a trend this year of Fortune 500 female CEOs being kind of replaced by male CEOs. So the overall percentage of women in that kind of top leadership step of big companies is also declining. But I think Karen Lynch is kind of the perfect example. She rose, I believe it was our inaugural list, last year's list, she was number 6. CVS is one of the largest Fortune 500 companies by sales, and so she was definitely the highest ranked female CEO in that list. Hence why she earned that spot. She did not make this year's list, which also I believe came out in December.
I cover politics. I have a special eye on Congress, and 2 people that I noticed that were on this list had really contentious exchanges while they were testifying in front of Congress. Those people are Harvard's former president, Claudine Gay, and Boeing's CEO, David Calhoun. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened to them in 2024?
Definitely 2, I think, very public figures, and I think to your point, right, Senate confirmation hearings, Senate hearings as a whole get a lot of eyes, and it's a lot of times where, I don't know, maybe this is the sign at the end, depending on how these contention hearings goes, right? And so we'll start with Dave Calhoun, just because I have him, alphabetically higher up on my list. He was the Boeing CEO. Again, same story. He was brought in 2020 with the idea of, we're going to overcharge this, we're going to overturn it. 2 big crashes had killed 346 people at the time. And so he really was kind of seen as the person to bring change. A couple years later, the company is still struggling over safety measurements. It's still struggling with this. Just recently at the end of the year, there was another big crash in South Korea. And so, I think this is an interesting point where we also separate the company from the person, right? Boeing as a whole has continued to have a bad year despite Dave Calhoun's leadership. Kelly Ortberg took over, I believe, in August. And so, again, we're talking about larger systematic problems here, but Calhoun kind of is still the face of the company, especially when the big January of last year, that image of the plane, of the door of the plane of an Alaska airline flight flying open, and kind of what sparked all these investigations. So he announced he'd be retiring by the end of the year. By August, he was replaced. I doubt we'll be seeing much of Dave Calhoun anytime soon in terms of big public announcements. And Claudine Gay, again, was an early kind of ouster. The Senate the Senate hearings that you were mentioning happened at the end of 2023. And I think by January, she was already embattled in cheating allegations, plagiarism allegations for her own dissertation. Big donors had stopped donating. Bill Ackman really kind of propelled a big campaign against her on social media. And by January 2nd, she resigned.
I think something that your list really shows is that career crashes can happen across any industry. We're touching on politics, education, entertainment, and beyond. Is there anyone else that's notable on your list that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I want to touch on kind of the AI adjacent kind of companies, because we have seen, right, AI's been this huge source of investment, very much kind of positive light. I mean, some dangers as well, but we've seen people kind of really skyrocket to fame and say, big career bump. But I think, a couple of years after the ChatGPT opened up, and that's kind of, we saw this kind of core of investment and just innovation in the space, we're seeing some of it come down. So I think the big name to call out there is Ahmad Mostak of Stability AI, which, my colleagues at Forbes have done a really great job at documenting the failures in the company and how it's grown. The company, Stability AI is a company behind Stable Diffusion, a very popular, text-to-image generator. And so it was super popular again among AI, users, because, hey, I can type in flower and it pops up a flower without having to look for one. The company most recently released, I believe, $100 million at a $1 billion valuation. So raising huge amounts of money. But after, a lot of investigation, again, I want to credit my Forbes colleagues here because a lot of the news was broken by them. Is this idea that a lot of these was just built on exaggeration on lies, right? So he promised he was going to build bespoke AI models for nation states. That never happened. He claimed to have a special deal with Amazon. That was not true. There's reportedly a pretty disastrous meeting with NVIDIA's Jensen Huang over how Stability AI was going to work with the chip maker. And so he was out of the company, by June. And he was the majority stakeholder up until October when he sold. He's no longer that. And so we really saw, I think he's an example of an early AI juggernaut that we saw really peak and now has completely kind of tumbled. I think the other kind of AI standout or AI adjacent is Pat Gelsinger over at Intel. Intel has kind of really been losing out in the overall chip making race. Again, Pat Gelsinger is another one of those people who was brought in to kind of revitalize and energize and bring Intel back to the top in the semiconductor kind of space. And a year later, its biggest chip rivals, NVIDIA and AMD, have soared in production, have really been cashing in on this AI production. And Intel has just kind of stuck and been lagging behind.
I think something that's really interesting about your list, even if you gave it to yourself last year, I mean, one woman, Karen Lynch, was Forbes' most powerful women one year. Now she's on the career crashes. If you gave this list to me on January 20th, 2021, the day of Biden's inauguration, when Donald Trump's out of the White House, not even there, President Biden is now the president, I wouldn't believe you because Trump's now the comeback, Biden is now the career crash. So is what you're saying, is what you're gathering from all of your reporting here, that just because you're featured on the career crashes of one year, that doesn't necessarily mean that your career is dead in the water? Can you have a second act? Can you have a third act?
Absolutely. Third, fourth, fifth. I mean, I think, we were really seeing that with Elon Musk, with Donald Trump. I have no doubt that a lot of these people who have crashed, Adam Newman, right? A lot of these people who, again, come to the peak, the higher you rise, the greater the fall is. But that doesn't mean you can't climb back up. And I think, that's very much kind of what we're seeing is just because you're a crash this year, it doesn't mean that you can change our minds next year.
Well, we will certainly be keeping an eye on all of these careers in 2025. Maria, per usual, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you so much for having me.